This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow Cook Eat Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven. And today I'm with Josie, the head gardener at Perch Hill, who is going to share doing November question and answers, sort of horticultural Q&A for us for this month, as she has the previous months actually. But anyway, so let's start. The first one that we've been sent in is about forcing bulbs. And are we now too late to get bulbs for Christmas? Well, the first thing I just wanted to mention was, what does it mean, a forced bulb versus a garden bulb? A forced bulb just simply means that it's been put down to a lower temperature. And I'm not a total expert on this, but I think it's somewhere between 3 and 5 degrees. And it's kept in a fridge at that temperature for 4 to 6 weeks or a little bit longer to make it feel like it's had winter. So then when you bring it out or plant it in a normal temperature condition, it thinks it's spring. So the forcing process of putting it in a fridge makes it think it's had winter. And so then it comes out of that and it thinks, it's spring, I'm going to grow now. And so that forces it out of its natural growth curve and starts it off early. That's basically the process of forcing. Now, what can you still do? Well, to be honest, by this stage in November, to get things for Christmas, there's only really one plant that's guaranteed to give you flower, and those are paper white narcissus. Now, we won't get Josie on this because that's why I'm doing this one, because she can't bear the smell, which I know is a genetic thing and lots of people can't. But I absolutely love having paper whites, and I make quite elaborate nests through which they grow. I tend to put them in a leaf planter, and I sometimes do this rather lovely family tradition of doing one large base pot with another smaller pot on top, and I put like 3 or 5 bulbs, depending on the top size pot, in the top pot, and then all around the edge of that top pot in the base pot, I then plant maybe 7, 9, 11 bulbs. And once they're in, I make sure I've really properly supported the top pot on the base pot. And then I weave a silver birch nest, linking the two, so that I've got something really showy and beautiful even before the bulbs start to shoot. And to finish it off, I top the compost off with some moss that I pick from the garden, and sometimes even some lovely oak leaves or something like that. So it literally looks like a sort of Japanese miniature garden. And off they shoot. And the great thing about paper whites is that they don't need dark and cool. So they just need to be put in the cool for 4 weeks. And then you can bring into the house, and off they'll shoot. And hopefully will be in flower in time for Christmas. So that's exactly what I'll be doing this weekend, and it's a really good prompt to do it now. So Josie, another thing that I know we're doing at Perch Hill, and it's an important job for this time of year, is planting bare root roses and shrubs and perennials and things. So over to you on a question on that.
Yes, so we've had a question basically asking to explain what it's all about. So if I give sort of a brief overview of what bare root means and what the advantages and disadvantages are. So from November onwards, you can start planting bare root plants. So if you're buying from a supplier, it means they're sent to you without soil or compost. They literally come in a bag and bare rooted. So the advantages of this is it's obviously a lot cheaper. The packaging is a lot cheaper. You're not packing pots full of compost and sending it in the post, or, even if you're taking it in your car, it's heavy. If they're quite big shrubs or whatever, it can get quite heavy. So there's less packaging. There's obviously less labour because they haven't been potted on. You haven't had to maintain them. They're grown in open fields. And it's less carriage, less maintenance. Yeah. So that affects the price. So that makes them cheaper. If you plant now, you won't have to water them so much because you'll get natural rainfall. That'll keep them watered over the winter. This applies mainly to deciduous shrubs, and you wouldn't necessarily, you can't really do evergreens as bare roots. So it's things like roses, deciduous shrubs, and of course perennials. Heleniums, peonies. All these things can be bought bare root now and planted now, and they often take off quicker. They establish more quickly because if they're growing in a pot of compost, they're used to that lovely, nutritious compost. You put them in soil and they think, oh, don't know what this is.
No thanks.
Yeah. Whereas if they've been field grown, they're going from field grown into a bag into your garden, and the transition isn't so huge. Obviously, the soil conditions will be slightly different from where they were grown, but it's not like they've got a root ball and then they've got to grow out of that root ball. The roots are already spread out and ready to go, and of course you get more choice because if you think a supplier can't grow every single variety in a pot to supply to you, so they grow massively more in open ground. So you get more choice of varieties, which is always a good thing. Yeah, so it's a really worthwhile thing. So, and when they arrive, unpack them, and it's better to get them straight in the ground if you can. So things that stop you doing that is if the ground's waterlogged, don't plant if the ground's waterlogged, and don't plant if the ground's frozen. So if that happens, if they arrive and there's either of those two things happening, then just get a big bucket of old compost or whatever you've got, put them in that, cover the roots because the roots have to stay moist. And then as soon as conditions get better, get them into the ground as soon as you can. And that's what's called healing in, because you can either do it in a spare piece in your garden or you can do it in a bucket of compost. But that's when you read about healing in, that's what that means. Does that explain it? Hopefully.
Yeah, that explains it really clearly, I think.
Good.
So the final question that we've been sent in for this month, which obviously is not a hugely busy gardening month, November. It's quite a quiet time, really. But the final thing is there anything that one can still sow in November, or is it really a time to wash your seed trays and put everything away and forget about things till February? Well, I think, to be honest, we don't sow much in November, December, January, or till Valentine's Day in February. But if you really wanted to, and you've got a greenhouse, I think there are still things to sow. And it has been quite a mild autumn so far. It's more like 3 weeks ago in a normal year, perhaps, because we haven't had any hard frosts. So if I really wanted to sow something, the things that I think would be most likely to succeed would be from the edibles. Chervil is super hardy, super hardy. I couldn't believe the other day I was in the greenhouse and there have been seeds from last year's chervil and another thing called winter purslane or claytonia, and they'd actually just started to germinate in the compost in the greenhouse where the tomatoes had been. So that's a sign that they really like cold, dark weather to germinate. So both of those would do. So salads and hardy herbs. And then the other thing, really surprisingly, is flat leaf parsley. I've actually sown in November and had good success with. But remember, with flat leaf parsley, you need to wash the germinator inhibitor off the seed coat. How do you do that? Just soak it in a saucer of water overnight and then put it through a sieve and dry it out on a little bit of kitchen towel or loo paper or whatever on the saucer, and only sow seed when it's dry because otherwise it'll all go into a clump and that's a bit of a pain. But so I would say for edible things, herbs, hardy herbs, chervil, flat leaf parsley, possibly coriander as well is worth a try, and then lots of different salads. So salad rocket, Mitsuno is dead hardy, any of the mustards. There are lots and lots of things. And I mentioned claytonia, winter purslane. So any of those, I think it's definitely still worth sowing if you haven't sown them already. And do you know what? I would sow them direct into pots or direct into the ground in your greenhouse if you have an earth bed in your greenhouse. So those are the edibles. And then in terms of ornamentals, again, to be honest, there aren't many. If you're desperate to sow something, you could sow sweet peas and you would get them in flower by Chelsea week in May because it gets them into flower earlier. But you've got to be careful to protect against mice having them for lunch because they love sweet pea seed. And so I would probably stick to some really properly hardy annuals. So cornflowers in our trialling at Perch are the hardiest of all hardies. And whatever the weather throws at them, whether it's wet or cold, cornflowers come through the winter outside. So I think they would be worth it. And my favourite is Centaurea cyanus blackball, the black one I love. The other plant that we got through the winter last year from sowing really late is cerinthe or honeywort, because it is a hardy annual. And as long as we don't get a really hard frost, that will come through. And we've got seedlings in the gravel bed here that are still growing away perfectly happily. And so I would say those would be worth a try. And also, if you have a greenhouse, put some in there too to get them into flower in April with your tulips. And the final thing that I love for sowing at this time of year, straight into a terracotta ornamental pot for either bringing inside in March and April or having in a greenhouse or having on the doorstep, is the Linaria family. And Linaria morocana sweeties mix has the most delicious kind of sweet shop fragrance. And that is pretty hardy too. But if you get a really hard frost, just put a little sheet of fleece over it if it's outside, or just bring it in for the night and put it out again in the morning. So just to recap, for edibles, hardy herbs, chervil, possibly coriander, definitely flat leaf parsley, hardy salads, mitsuna, rocket, mustards particularly, and winter purslane. For ornamentals, I would go cornflowers, cerinthe, and Linaria. Any to add from you, Josie?
Well, actually, at Perch Hill this week, we've just sown two great beds of Phacelia, the green manure.
Good idea.
We're just hoping that if the mildish weather continues, it'll grow on over winter very slowly, and then we'll, as it's a green manure, we'll dig it in spring, leave a little edging for the bees because they love it so much. But yes, that's what we've sown this week.
Great. So that's it. So see you in December, everybody, or you'll be listening to us and we will be doing the Q&A in a few weeks' time. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and thanks so much, Josie, for joining.
Okay, bye.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, I'd really love it if you reviewed, rated and subscribed on wherever you listen to your podcasts. It'll help new listeners to know that we're here and enable us to keep getting the very best and most interesting guests week after week.